We're invited to think critically about what we know. And if students think about what they're asked to do at the end of a lot of their work is reflect. Knowledge and technology is another theme that we look at, particularly today in the world of AI. There's so many questions in almost every subject area. I said a moment ago that you don't do experiments in mathematics, but with quantum computers running AI generative models, you can experiment in mathematics because it just gives us a new universe to play with almost. What do the students find difficult? I think that talking about responsibility as a theme is difficult.
Hello and welcome to another engaging session. Today we will be talking on TOK, the theory of knowledge. I am Vrinda Bhandari, Head of Academics at Sparkl, and I have with me Mr. Matthew Raggett, Head of the Academic Council at Sparkl. He's also the director of Thuringia International School in Germany and has been teaching TOK for 25 years. For those of you who are pursuing the IB curriculum, you must be very familiar with TOK and its demands. For all others who may be considering IB in the future, this and our subsequent session will tell you all that you need to know about TOK and how to approach it. So just to set the context on the importance of TOK, Matthew, what happens if a student does not meet the TOK requirements in the IB diploma course?
Well, like every element of the core of the diploma program, it's not a subject where you walk into an examination, but it is something where if you don't complete the course and if you don't submit it, then you don't get your diploma. So this, the core, it means what it says. It's at the very heart of the diploma program.
Right, absolutely. So no matter how well you may have done in all other subjects, no diploma without the TOK submissions.
Absolutely.
So also for this year, IB has already released the TOK titles. So those of you who are in IBDP may have already looked at those. And if you are an IB student, I'm sure you're wondering where to start. But don't worry, we've got you covered. So Matthew, you've been teaching TOK for many, many years now. So what makes it different from other subjects in IB?
Well, the other subjects in the IB have a course guide which actually sets out some of the content for the course, or it sets out the requirement that you study 6 works of literature or a body of literature, or you look at particular genres in arts or film. There's options and choice, but you still are required to do certain things in terms of content, which makes it a little bit like some of the CBSE and ISC learning that students might be used to in their other schools. But for TOK, the course is really a framework where we are exploring how to think critically about what we know and how we know those things through our different subjects. And we call subjects areas of knowledge in TOK. So we're invited to understand, how do mathematicians work and how do they think? How do scientists work and think? And how is that mathematics different from that science? Because they really are quite different. With mathematics, we have a sense of what certainty could be. In sciences, we have no idea what certainty looks like, but we try and approach a version of it by eliminating things that are not true. So I think that's the fundamental difference. It's a framework for exploring our knowledge and thinking critically. Absolutely.
And of course, questioning a lot of things that have been considered to be true for up till grade 10 or 11 that they've been studying.
Right, yeah. One of the first things that you're invited to do as a TOK student is think about you as a knower. It's a funny sounding phrase, knowledge and the knower, but we're all people who know things, but we've grown up in a particular house, we've gone to a particular school, we live in a particular country. And with all of those things come systems of knowledge, which to somebody else might look like bias or might look like superstition or tradition, rather than, current, relevant, up-to-date, critically tested knowledge. So you're invited to reflect, first of all, on how do you know the things you know? What do you bring to the table? And what does that person over there bring to the table that's different from you? So we talk about critical thinking being developed through the IB diploma program. It really happens very well in the TOK course.
Absolutely. So this is what our plan is for today. We will be doing a two-part series, and the plan for today's session is that we'll be looking at TOK's place in the IBDP core, what we do in the TOK course, like Matthew just mentioned, critically reflecting on what we know, knowledge and the knower, themes, TOK concepts, the areas of knowledge. We will discuss about the TOK assessment, both internal and external assessment, the exhibition and the essay, and we will be unpacking 2 essay titles from last year, which will help you unpack titles for this year. Okay, so starting with TOK's place in the IBDP core.
So no matter what subjects you study in the TOK diploma, and you have to take 6 subjects, every student does the same thing in the core. Now, there's still some choice there. So one of the things in the core is the extended essay, and this is an opportunity for students to do an original piece of research. We used to call these PhDs at university. Now we do them in school. It's called an extended essay. But it gives you a chance to really dig deeply into something that you're passionate about or that fascinates you. We also have the creativity, activity, and service element of the core, which is where we're showing that we can think of others, make connections between ourselves and our community, and give and act over a sustained period of time. Also to stay fit and healthy and manage our own well-being. And then there's theory of knowledge, which is the course that I've just described and that we're going to be looking at in more detail today. All 3 things have to be done, have to be submitted. They're not all assessed. The extended essay is sent away and an examiner reads it. For theory of knowledge, we'll see that we have some internal and some external assessment. CAS isn't assessed at all, but it's a record that you keep of what you do and what you learn by doing it.
Right. So let's further deep dive into what we do in the TOK course. So Matthew, if you could just elaborate on the basic idea of theory of knowledge with respect to core themes, the areas of knowledge, what does all of this entail?
Yeah, so what are called areas of knowledge in TOK? Some people might say, well, these are subjects, but they're not quite, because if we look at these examples of the areas of knowledge, we've got the arts, which can include in the diploma fine art, creative art. We've also got film. We've also got theatre arts. We could be doing dance, drama, music as well. Those are all in the arts. We've got history, which is this sort of standalone subject area that isn't like others because the way that historians work is fundamentally different. A lot of people might lump history together with other choices in school like psychology or business management. But in psychology, you can actually do experiments. You don't do experiments in history. You're looking backwards to collect what was left behind by what happened. We've then got the human sciences and natural sciences. One of those is working with perfect objects that always fall at the same rate or always roll in the same way. And the other is looking at imperfect objects like people. Yeah, so that is psychology, that is anthropology, that is business management. And then we've got mathematics, your favorite subject, Vrinda, which is, again, different from those other 4 areas, because in mathematics, you don't do experiments, but what you can do is you can make generalized assumptions, you can make universal claims about what's true or not, because maths is built on things that are so self-evidently true that you don't need to question them. Like, you can draw a straight line and extend it to infinity. You can draw a right angle and the other right angle is exactly the same. So these areas of knowledge are defined by the way in which we work within that knowledge system. So we look at that in TOK. And you're teaching that as well in your classes, aren't you? As a math teacher, you bring TOK in.
Absolutely. So, of course, as the IB says that, every teacher is a TOK teacher, and we do have a lot of opportunities in our classes to discuss this while we are teaching the subject. So I think everybody is doing that.
Yeah, and I said we're invited to think critically about what we know, and if students think about what they're asked to do at the end of a lot of their work is reflect, and that act of reflection is a critical act where you're thinking about what could I have improved, what would I do differently next time, what could I do to get more perspectives than those I have found. All of these are actually TOK concepts that we're invited to dig into when we reflect. I mentioned the word concepts there as well. We'll look at those in a minute, but big ideas that come up through theory of knowledge. We don't always get the chance to look at big ideas in our subject areas. Yeah. And this is an opportunity for us to do that.
Yes. And how about the optional themes, Matthew? How are they placed in the course?
The core themes, or the themes that are incredibly important to do. Knowledge and the knower is the starting theme, where we begin with looking at ourselves, our biases, the culture that we grew up in, the beliefs that we have. What do we think is true? What do we think is certain? Our ethics as well. Where did those come from? But then we also look at the themes of knowledge and language, how the language we choose affects the things that we know, and how that knowledge is transmitted, but also how the different languages that we speak and communicate allow us to see and experience the world differently. Knowledge and technology is another theme that we look at, particularly today in the world of AI. There's so many questions in almost every subject area. I said a moment ago that you don't do experiments in mathematics, but with quantum computers running AI generative models, you can experiment in mathematics, because it just gives us a new universe to play with almost. Yeah.
Absolutely. So moving on, we will be looking at TOK concepts. So these are just the threads that put everything together, and these are the basis for the TOK altogether. So Matthew, which concepts do you think students find easy to work with, and which do they find more challenging?
Yeah, so these are the big ideas. You can talk about these concepts of truth and responsibility and power and objectivity in every area of knowledge, but they behave differently. So if we take the idea of certainty, for example, maths teachers and maths students are used to being certain in mathematics. Yeah. You add two numbers and you get an answer. Yeah, we're slightly less certain in science, but we know that science works. The utility of science has given us some incredible things. Certainty in something like the arts, well, that's pretty different, because it's not as objective. My preferences, my feelings make me see, my experiences as well make me see things differently. I was just watching the inauguration of the new performance space at Woodstock School earlier, and listening to some different music there from Korea, from India, and then Western music, and those differences coming from my own culture make me think that some of that music is fantastic, and some of it is really challenging to listen to. So culture is a big part of the concepts within TOK. What do the students find difficult? I think that talking about responsibility as a theme is difficult. We almost don't do it in our subjects. What's the responsibility of mathematicians and the way they work? Do you ever talk about that?
Not at all, actually.
It's a tricky one, isn't it? Within sciences, we there's so many things that we can do, but should we? Maybe a few people saw Oppenheimer at the cinema last year, and maybe they'd start thinking, just because we can, should we invent a weapon that can destroy a whole city in one go? There's an opportunity to talk about responsibility. Yeah.
That is indeed a difficult one to be able to relate in all AOKs.
No, it really is. I think the other thing that students find difficult is actually writing about this stuff whilst talking about another subject. And that's something that we try and do and try and practice a lot in TOK. And I know the students find it hard because when I ask them to do this early on in the course, they roll their eyes at me, which means, they would rather not. But practicing writing a paragraph at the end of a discussion to try and articulate what you thought when you started, how your mind has been changed and why it was changed. This is really good practice for the essay that they're going to have to write at the end and that we're going to talk about in a minute.
Yes. We will talk about the essay, but before that, we also have the internal assessment in TOK, which is the TOK Exhibition. So we know that there are prompts given to us, 35 prompts given to us by the IB, and students are supposed to work on those prompts and put up an exhibition for the same. So, Matthew, what kind of prompts are they, and what kind of prompts should one choose to make a great exhibition?
Right. So, I mean, the exhibition is a fantastic opportunity for students to show off their critical thinking skills. Something also that students find a little tricky in TOK is that they're not talking about a subject in itself. They're not talking about content. It's these ideas of, culture, power, responsibility. Right. It's the ideas of what makes this area of knowledge different from another one that they have to put on display. So the exhibition is a chance to talk about that. The prompts, some of them are questions, some of them are statements. So there's three examples we've got here on the slide. Can new knowledge change established values or beliefs? There's the prompt. Is bias inevitable in the production of knowledge? So the idea of these prompts is that it just gets you thinking. And what you have to do as a student is try and explore with the real world as your vehicle for the exploration, a response to this prompt. So, I mean, I'm a scientist. I studied physics and maths at university. So I love this third prompt here. To what extent is certainty attainable? And when I think of that question, so these images I chose because they make me think, first of all, there's a cat. There's a load of equations behind it. That's Schrödinger's cat. Yeah. So that makes me think about the dead and alive cat at the same moment until I actually take a measurement, until I do the experiment. The possibility exists that there are two things inside this box. So I would talk about Schrödinger's cat as one of my exhibition objects. There's a still life painting there. Is certainty attainable in the arts? So I can compare the arts with science, and I can think that, well, obviously that's a bunch of bananas and a pineapple, and I'm sure of that. Am I certain of that? Yeah, I think that I am. But I still recognize that that isn't actually a bunch of bananas and an apple and a pineapple. It's a painting of. Yeah. And maybe if Picasso did a painting of them, they wouldn't quite look like that. But I would probably know that they are still fruit in a still life. But the level of certainty goes down. But that's also because I'm doing a lot more interpretation. And then I've got the opportunity to talk about how we can interpret things and how our experiences allow us to see things. And they allow us to remember things and remember people. And the third object there, I've got this measuring device, and I can talk about the way in which we've made these tools to measure things that we can't measure just by looking at them.
Yes. So to relate this to math, of course, we talk about error in measurements, and it's only as accurate as the tool that we are using, and we are never certain.
Absolutely. And again, at the end of our science IAs, that's what we have to reflect on, isn't it? How could I have done that better? How could I improve my results? Should I take more of them? So I have to make this presentation. I have to give it to people by speaking, and I have to either show images like I am here or have the actual object. But the assessment is for my writing, and I have to write 300 words on each of these objects, so 900 words altogether. And that piece of writing is how I'm assessed. And in the TOK course guide, there's a rubric that tells me and tells my teacher what I need to do well.
Right. So then, of course, comes the big one in grade 12, which is, of course, our main point of discussion today. That is the TOK essay.
Right. So the TOK exhibition usually happens at the end of DP1. It's supposed to happen in the first part of the program. And the essay, so my DP2 students are just starting the process of unpacking the essay titles. And what we're going to do now is actually what I did in my classes last week with a colleague, where we took our grade 12 students through this. So the point of the essay is to write a clear, coherent exploration of the title. And here, again, we're not writing an essay about a subject. We're not writing it about something that we like or believe. We are trying to show off our thinking skills and show our understanding of how these systems of knowledge that we learn about in school actually work.
So that's actually quite difficult to not show off your subject knowledge, but to look at different perspectives and use examples, but still not make it subject heavy.
Yeah, that's it. And again, that people find it difficult because we've not been trained to do this along the way. When I'm writing my lab report in science, or when I'm writing a book review for one of my literature courses, it is about the content. It is about the thing that we've been studying. Yeah. And now I need to sort of zoom out and think about something from the perspective of a mathematician or a historian.
Yes. And of course, these are one has to write 1600 words in response to one of the 6 titles.
That's right. So it's not certainly not as much as writing our extended essay. There are other pieces of internal assessment where people might write more, but the critical thing is providing that clear, coherent, and critical exploration of the title. These characteristics are listed on the assessment rubric. It's called the assessment tool in TOK. Over here on the left-hand side, this is what you need to be doing to score 10 marks out of 10 for the essay. Be insightful, be convincing, accomplished. So when the examiner's reading it, they're thinking, wow, that's interesting. This person really understands what they're talking about. If you look on the right-hand side, ineffective, descriptive, incoherent, and formless. Now, most of our students who've got to DP2, they're not going to be incoherent or formless because they know how to write or structure an essay, and they know how to write with some kind of flow. But the word there to avoid is descriptive. And descriptive is what you're being when you are talking about content, or where you're choosing an example to demonstrate something, but what you actually do is just talk about the example. So that's the danger. That's the thing to avoid. And we're going to look at how to do that in a moment with the titles.
Yes, let us move on to the titles. So we have with us the May 2025 TOK essay prescribed titles. We'll just read them out. The first one is a question, which is, do historians and human scientists have an ethical obligation to follow the directive? Do not ignore contradictory evidence. Discuss with reference to history and the human sciences.
The second question, is our most revered knowledge more fragile than we assume it to be? Discuss with reference to the arts and one other area of knowledge.
The third one is, how can we reconcile the relentless drive to pursue knowledge with the finite resources we have available? Discuss with reference to the natural sciences and one other area of knowledge.
Question 4. Do the ever-improving tools of an area of knowledge always result in improved knowledge? Discuss with reference to 2 areas of knowledge.
The fifth one, to what extent do you agree with the claim, all models are wrong, but some are useful, attributed to George Box? Discuss with reference to mathematics and one other area of knowledge.
And question 6, does acquiring knowledge destroy our sense of wonder? Discuss with reference to 2 areas of knowledge.
Let's further discuss on what title should the students choose and also what not to choose.
Right. So one of the things that we do when we read these titles is we've got to think, what can I bring to that title? If the title mentions a particular area of knowledge, am I studying that? Is that one of my higher levels? It's likely that I'm spending more time thinking about my higher levels. Maybe I can bring more to the title if that's true. What do I want to study in the future? Hey, if I'm going to study mathematics when I leave school, I should probably choose that one that talks about mathematics, and one other area of knowledge. Who am I? What can I do to bring myself into this question? It's a great thing to be able to talk about your own personal experience. But the danger there is that you only talk about your personal experience, and you are required to think about other perspectives. Okay, so that's something to be mindful of. We're also living in the real world, and the job here in the essay is to really think about a coherent, critical response. But why not choose an example of what is happening now? There's so many things going on in the world. Can I bring something that I'm, curious about or passionate about into these? We'll look at that in a moment when we go through the breakdowns. Can I think of good examples? I mean, when I read through these titles, am I already thinking, all models are wrong? It says maths, but there's a great opportunity to talk about the science of that. And in physics, we're using models all the time. But we might be doing models when we're using psychology or business management. We've got different economic models that I could talk about too. And then that last question, which is equally important, not just what do I choose, but what do I not choose? What should I avoid? So I think if we look at those titles again, maybe one of them stands out. So you and I have talked about these titles a little bit, and the one that's in red. I think we both felt I'd avoid that one. What makes you want to avoid that one?
I think one is that you just mentioned it'll become really personal, and it'll avoid a lot of perspective that one must have.
I mean, it's got that phrase "revered knowledge" in, hasn't it? So when I think about revered knowledge, I mean, just in terms of the language, when do I use the word revered? I mean, that's when I'm talking about beliefs. I'm thinking about religions and things that are sacred.
That's not a very safe territory.
No, it's a tricky one because I get sucked into my beliefs, what I think is sacred, and it's super hard to be critical about something that is incredibly important that I grew up with. And it's a brave move to think, well, if I'd have been born 2,000 kilometers to the west or to the east, I'd have a different belief system,
Yes. So that is something, of course, that one should avoid because it does become difficult to write about this.
Yeah, and again, that question number 5, you and I might love that, being maths and science geeks. But someone who, my daughter was always into creative arts, theatre arts, music. That's not the one that she's going to choose because we're not using models in those areas of knowledge in the way that you're invited to talk about them here.
Absolutely. So we will, of course, now be discussing title 1 and 5.
Yep, we've highlighted them because those are the ones that we would choose. So let's go through that process.
I would only go with the 5th one, though.
Okay.
That's the one that would also probably have been my HL subject. Okay, so let's start with unpacking question 1. Do historians and human scientists have an ethical obligation to follow the directive, do not ignore contradictory evidence? And we need to discuss this with reference to history. Of course, we are given one, history and the human sciences. So we are given both the areas of knowledge already. So Matthew, what are the highlights? What all students need to know when they are unpacking a question before they actually start writing the essay?
Right. So we're given the opportunity here to talk about these two areas of knowledge. Now, every area of knowledge has a scope. So what's the, how broad is this area of knowledge? What does it cover and what does it not cover? So the scope is something that I need to keep in mind. We've got methods and tools that we use in a particular area of knowledge. So here we need to be aware of what those methods and tools are as historians and as human sciences. These people work differently, and within the framework of their area of knowledge, they have particular responsibilities. There's the TOK concept. That responsibility is tied to obligation. And again, within every area of knowledge, we're talking about ethics and the moral choices that we have to make when we do history or when we do social science, human sciences. So I've got those in my head whilst I'm reading this question. And I'm thinking about responsibility, ethical obligation. And then the next thing there, the directive. Do not ignore contradictory evidence. Now, what's the opposite? Ignore contradictory evidence. So I need to know each end of that spectrum. And of course, people are complicated. We work everywhere on that spectrum in between. I might want to explore, when is it okay to ignore contradictory evidence, or in what field might I choose to do that? Because ignoring is a choice, of course. So I need to be clear on all of these terms. Obligation, what is ethical?
Yes, so it's also about being able to handle the responsibility that they have, and not just talk about the responsibility.
I suppose, yeah. I mean, you can do that, but I think that it's probably safer to talk about the responsibility of the historian. Yeah. Now, of course, historians, who do they work for? There are very few people who are like gentlemen historians who just don't need to earn a living. We are all working to earn a crust, and historians are mostly academics. So they're employed by universities. And they are funded by people. And here you've got a particular chance to talk about power and objectivity. And if you think about that notion of history being written by the winners, the history of a country, the history that I am taught in my school, what is the contradictory evidence to that history? Do I bother to go and find it? Maybe I don't as a student.
Would this also depend on culture? Because we see a lot of things written by different people who belong to different cultures, and they have a different perspective on it altogether.
Absolutely. And I mean, for students working in the Indian context, the histories that there are of India, if I think of, when I was growing up in the United Kingdom, the British history of India is laughable when you think of it from an Indian context. The same events seen in such dramatically different ways. It wasn't until I went and visited Amritsar where I'm understanding the absolute disgrace of the history that I was taught growing up. Yeah. So again, you've got a great opportunity to talk about the culture, and today nationalism is a big thing all over the world. Histories are being rewritten at the moment. Who's checking the responsibility of the people that are doing that? It's happening in the US. It's happening in Germany, where I live. Europe is changing at this moment. India is as well. I'd also, looking at that idea of contradictory evidence, you could argue, I think, that it's the job of a historian to look at contradictory evidence. Yeah, you are required within the way that you work. And of course, that's absolutely true in human science, because scientists can only try to show that something is not true. So you build a hypothesis, you build a model, and you test it, and you try and show that it's wrong. Because when you eliminate something that's wrong, you are closer to the truth. And by describing that in your essay, you are showing that you understand, yeah, that's how science works. Whereas in history, it's my job to find the evidence to support an idea and to challenge it by looking for contradictory evidence.
Right. So because this is a question, should we have an answer to it at the end?
Oh, absolutely. So if it's a question, or if it's, to what extent do you agree, then you've got to close. Your final paragraph has got to respond to the title. I mean, in fact, if you look in detail at the assessment tool, the very first thing is that what's being discussed is directly related to the title. So every paragraph, what you should be doing, and we'll talk about this in our next session about how you do the writing. You got to refer back to that title so that the examiner can see, oh yeah, they are continually doing the job of responding to that. Yeah,
Absolutely. It's actually really easy to go off track, I think, while writing, because there are so many things that one tends to write about, and discussing different perspectives. So I think that's a good uh, advice also, that one must certainly answer if there is a question.
Yeah. The other thing we've got here, the bottom right, we've got examples. So
Yeah.
the other things that we have to do in our essay are choose examples and present an argument around the evidence that our examples provide for a particular response or belief. And then we've also got to make sure that we examine different points of view. That's the language that's used there, different points of view.
Yes.
And to do very well, we have to evaluate those points of view. Yeah. So I need to find and think of examples within this. So the example we've got on the screen there, Amy Cuddy, who's a professor, who's a social scientist, who did a lot of work in this idea that the way I stand and hold myself determines my confidence when I deal with things. She found that through her experiments, but no one else has been able to repeat the results. So, is that contradictory evidence? Well, yeah, it is, but maybe she's not that interested because she's built a whole career around this sense of power stances. And there are other people
actually,
like this.
when we were discussing, you mentioned Amy Cuddy, and I did not know who she is. So how do students look for examples? How should they start looking for examples, and in what direction?
So I think that a lot of the examples that students will be given come through their classes. So I know that my psychology students in school, they know about Amy Cuddy, right? And they know, okay, so they've talked about the ethics of the way that human scientists work. Within science, you might, if you're doing something about atomic theory, no, that's not the best example. If you're doing something about the creation of the universe, you know that you've got these different they're models, I suppose, the Big Bang or the steady state, and you can look at that story of how Fred Hoyle chose to stick with his theory in the face of all the contradictory evidence, because he just didn't like the idea that something can come from nothing, even though he understood the uncertainty principle and the conservation of energy principle very well. It was a belief, almost like a religious belief to him. So what is it that makes people ignore contradictory evidence? And I know, there are other examples you can find from business. Economics is built on this foundation of believing the earth is an infinite source of raw materials, and that growth can continue forever. And yet we look around the world and think it's not working, is it? So you've probably got some business management examples, and in school you've got your teachers. With Sparkl, you've got your tutor that's working with you. You can have conversations and just learn about these examples. And we've all got great AI tools at our fingertips. I'm sure if we ask questions about examples of certain things, we'll have some suggestions to work with.
Right. So also reiterating the idea that this should be related to the subjects and the HL subjects that you're doing, because you tend to dive deeper into those anyway.
Yeah, I think so. It's a missed opportunity, isn't it? You chose those higher levels. Why don't you lean into them a little bit? And all the time, of course, you're right. You're thinking about what are the big themes? What's the big idea that I'm trying to explore through this? So you've got your areas of knowledge covered. You clarify your terms as you're working through the title. You're deciding on your focus, which might be one of the themes, or it might be some of the concepts. And then you choose your examples, not too many, but you choose your examples so that you are then able to use them as a vehicle to talk about your TOK understanding and skills. That's the job.
Right. Let's move on to the next question, which is, to what extent do you agree with the claim all models are wrong? That some are useful, attributed to George Box, and this, of course, we need to discuss with reference to mathematics and one other area of knowledge.
So when I read this for the first time, I had no idea who George Box was. Had you heard of him?
No, I had to look him up and see who George Box is and what he had to say about models.
Right. So you and I both have mathematics degrees. George Box never came into it, but he's a statistician, isn't he? So in statistics is one of those little bits of mathematics where you are modeling.
Yes. So in fact, in the IBDP math course, mathematical modeling is a huge part of it, specifically the AI course, where they are applying a lot of math, and definitely in stats as well, because we do a lot of linear regression and non-linear regression also in some cases. So yes, models are a big part of the course.
Okay, so I mean, what you just said there, linear regression, as a science teacher, that's how I express relationships, isn't it? So I collect my data, I plot my data, and I find patterns, and then I use regression lines to come up with a mathematical expression of a theory or hypothesis. So you've just convinced me that the other area of knowledge we must look at here is science. Yeah, because science is using models all the time. I think that you've got a nice opportunity here with mathematics to let the examiner know that I know maths is an axiomatic system based on self-evident truth, and I can find certainty within the frame of mathematics, although not from outside it, because it's all just constructed and perhaps meaningless. But here with statistics, I'm modeling. Yeah. And I know it's not perfect. That's why Gauss created the statistics that we use to sort of roll over these imperfections.
So when I'm teaching models, I tell my students, and mathematically they are applicable, but they may not actually be true if we apply them to the real world. So there will always be examples which prove the model incorrect in some places or inapplicable at some places, whereas it may be absolutely okay mathematically.
Yeah, there's a beautiful book called The End of Average, where they talk about the problems of these averages that we've worked with for years. You take 10,000 data sets to understand the average woman. And I remember there's the story about the Hospital for Mothers and Children in the United States, where they made a sculpture of a woman based on all the average measurements, and then held a competition to find the average woman, and there isn't one. Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Yeah. So again, that model is wrong, but why is it useful? Because the sculpture, it's clearly a woman. Yeah. So there's some utility. So again, we've got the chance to really dig into what does the word useful mean to us. So in science, we know that we do not fully have certainty. However, we can still make a 1 terabyte micro SD card. That's useful. Yeah, it still works. And I think the lovely examples from science are sort of atomic theory. Those models of what is an atom. It isn't true. Science is like a fairy tale, but it helps us actually move forward and make progress. So the examples that we choose there, we're really, remember, trying to use them to show our TOK thinking. So we're talking about those concepts of certainty, truth, justification, and objectivity, if we're choosing maths and science as the areas of knowledge.
In statistics also, we do talk about certainty, because our DP students are doing a lot of hypothesis testing. So they understand what is certainty and to what extent are models true, or within what range are they true. They do study all of that. We don't study justification or evidence as such, but we do talk about reliability of models, that because we've taken a certain data to get the model, it is not very reliable outside of the data.
Yeah, and so that's the limit, isn't it? So when you're, and again, we've got to answer this question: to what extent do you agree? So you can frame that by saying that I agree, but within these limits. This is where statistics, or this bit of mathematics, or this is where this atomic theory works, but it doesn't work over here. And I think recognizing that there are these limits, it allows you to talk again about the scope of your area of knowledge, the scope of mathematics here, the scope of science here.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think that's where we start with unpacking those questions.
Absolutely. So
what are we going to do next?
That's about it, actually.
Yep. So we've looked
this
at.
Actually wraps up our part 1, and this is what we have in store for the next session, because we did help in unpacking the titles and help you understand what all you need to look at while you're unpacking the title, and of course how to choose the title first. So in the next session, we will look at how to write the TOK essay, its structure, style, the substance, how to develop an argument, how to come to examples, justifying your conclusion. We'll take up all of that in the next session.
Fantastic. So we look forward to doing that together next time. Thanks for joining us. Thanks, Vrinda. That was an interesting exploration.
Matthew.